Okay. You think of any questions about death notification or ride-alongs? I'll give you just a minute to, if there's any notes you made that you want to ask about. Kind of a tsunami, isn't it? Okay, look at, this is after the death notification materials, the guidelines for emergency response team chaplain at a crime scene. If you remember when the Murrah building in Oklahoma City was blown up, there were two law enforcement chaplains that were being interviewed pretty regularly. One of them was Jack Poe. He was the lead chaplain for the Oklahoma City Police Department. The other chaplain was an FBI chaplain. But Jack has, if you ever have an opportunity to listen to Jack or to sit down and talk with him, there's all kind of, is something wrong?
I see it's hanging on you differently, so let me just take care of that real quick here.
Okay.
We'll get you.
Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life here. No. Okay, that does feel better. Jack can tell you all kinds of things about Oklahoma City. Some of them you shake your head in utter amazement. People were showing up claiming to be chaplains. No pastoral training, no chaplain credentials, no nothing. They were picking up things to take home as souvenirs. Whenever that happened, then Jack and Joe would have to go back and negotiate with the feds for the chaplains to be available inside the perimeter. I had a chaplain assigned to recovery teams. The dogs got depressed because they weren't finding survivors. They weren't finding live people. And they had to plant people occasionally just so the dogs would be so depressed at continual failure to find a live one. Yeah, it's there's some pretty incredible stuff. But this is something that Jack kind of made some notes going along the way. I'm not going to read it all to you because there's two sheets here. But when you're called to whatever the incident is, if it's being treated as a crime scene, that's kind of what this is dealing with. Basically, there's going to be some kind of perimeter. They're going to secure an area. You may or may not get clearance to be in the area. It just depends on your department, depends on what the incident is. But if you are cleared to be in there, don't move anything. You know, unless you are specifically directed by an officer, don't move anything. More visible, I guess, than that is if you are called to a fatality accident scene. Pick your feet up. Don't shuffle. Because the fatality investigation team has to look at everything. They're looking at the skid marks. They're looking at where the car left the road and went into the ditch. They're looking to see if there were other tire marks coming from they're looking for everything, every little piece. Maybe a tail light, a piece of a tail light. If you're walking in an accident scene and you kick something, you just changed the evidence. So when you get to an accident scene and they say, yes, chaplain, you can come right up to where the vehicle is. Ask them where you need to stand. Where do I need to walk? You know, get some direction from your officers. It's crucial, you know, that you be very cognizant of the fact that there's evidence all around. And you may not think it's evidence. Maybe an empty beer can. Well, that may have come out of the vehicle and be part of the evidence showing that person was drunk. So there's a number of things there. it's real important when you show up at a scene, you need to check in with somebody. There may be an incident commander. There may be a sergeant. You know, the captain may show up and he may be in charge. There may be officers kind of around a perimeter to secure it so people don't just wander in, like news media. You know, you will find that officers are pretty good about warning each other that, you know, there's media here, you know, and everybody. I mean, you can see there's a tensing when they find out, yeah, media is walking down the road. They don't like media. As a general rule, they just don't like them. But you need to check in with somebody and find out for sure what you can and cannot do at that particular location. Now, if you're at a scene and they give you an assignment, this goes along with what you were asking earlier, if you physically cannot do it, you need to tell them immediately as they're trying to give you an assignment. If it's something you'd rather not do, you need to mention that too. But as a general rule, as a chaplain, if there's something they want you to do and you can do it, just accept it and go do it. Now here's the thing. You need to stay at that assignment till somebody relieves you or till somebody says you can go. They need to track, and I can give you a really good example. If there's a death in a house, when they... Yeah, I guess it did. Okay. No harm, no foul. When there's a home death, whether it's a suicide or unattended, whatever it is, when they are securing the house, they will put an officer at the door, at the entrance. That officer will log everybody who goes into the crime scene and everybody that comes out. They will have a pad. They will write it down. And even if you have clearance, they will write you down. It doesn't matter if the chief of police shows up. You know, at 1320, Chief Pete Cordham entered the building. At 1325, he left the building. They will do that. So it's very important for them to keep track of you. So check in, check out. Make sure that they know not only who you are, but where you are. And if you have an assignment, you hold that assignment till somebody else gets there. We, for our state organization a couple of years ago, we put together a go bag, is what we called it. And we put some things in that would be helpful for a chaplain to have at a scene if he's called and needs to go right then. You know, things like sanitary wipes, bottle of water, small first aid kit, gloves, leather gloves, work gloves. Down the road, you may want to consider that. You know, something they can throw in their trunk if you're not going to get a car. But there's a number of things to have yourself ready in case you need to stay for a while. So anyway, watch for officers that are struggling at a crime scene, like if it's a suicide or something. Watch for officers that may be by themselves. When Officer Ty Pratt was killed, Jason Ty Pratt was killed in Omaha, went to the funeral, and there's cops everywhere. I mean, if you've never been to a line of duty death funeral, it's a pretty incredible thing because cops from all over come. There's a unique bonding in law enforcement. You have the same thing in firefighters. They do the same thing. But they'll come from everywhere. There was an officer standing over by herself. None of her Omaha officers around her. Nobody from any other department. She's over by herself. I just kind of worked my way over there and just stood with her for a couple of minutes. That's all I did. That ministry of presence thing. And then we talked a little bit. But watch for an officer that for whatever reason you think they're struggling. You may not have a big opportunity right then. It may mean buying a cup of coffee 3 days later. The officers in my departments know I buy pie. It's a standing offer. Any officer, anytime that wants to talk, Bobby buys pie. And over the years, there's been some that have taken me up on that. But watch for the officer that for whatever trigger there is for you, it says that officer's struggling. There's something really eating at that officer. Watch for that kind of thing. Again, you got to keep your mouth shut. Again, don't talk to the media. This is where that servant attitude really comes into play, because you're going to do whatever needs to be done to provide support for your officers. You're not helping solve the crime. You're not doing anything like that. You're there for your officers. And like I said, it may involve picking up with them a little later on. Turn to the next page, just a little quicker summary. We'll just look at these real quick. The do's: check in, go where you're told to go, check out. Just be open to serve. Don't touch, don't move, don't remove bags, don't release information, don't make promises to the family that you can't keep, and don't be afraid to ask officers how they're doing. So this is just common sense. This is not any big profound thing. This is realize that you're part of a team. Your responsibility is not collecting the evidence. Your responsibility is not solving the crime, although you may. I was doing a ride-along one night and found the hit-and-run vehicle because we were walking an area, and I thought, look at that taillight. It matches the pieces that are on the ground over there. And sure enough, it did. So you may actually, contribute something like that. That's pretty rare, but, it does happen. So anyway, just some common sense things about crime scenes. It's not like, and actually, if you talk to officers, they'll tell you that the juries are too enamored with CSI and stuff, because did you check the DNA evidence? Well, no, we didn't, because there wasn't any. How come you didn't solve this murder in 30 minutes? Well, because it doesn't work that way. We still don't have a suspect in a murder from 4 years ago. So it's not quite like TV. Okay, we're going to talk about police personality. Some would say officers don't have any, but that's not exactly true. They tend to be control freaks. We're going to look at a number of things related to cop personality, cops and alcohol, cops and suicide. Between 2 and 3 times as many officers commit suicide every year as are killed in the line of duty. And when we get to that section, we'll talk about the importance of their handgun and why many times it's their handgun that they use to kill themselves. You have a little diagram there about chaplaincy, its presence, its training, and there's a spiritual side. You're God's representative in situations that are very ungodly. You bring that that sense of the presence of God. And your officers may not change their language around you, but they're glad that you're there. And you do help them to come down a few notches. Let's look at some common personality traits. Part of the control issue is officer safety. They're trained to be in command emotionally, situationally. We're going to look at shame and guilt in a minute, but they are trained to take control of a situation. I mean, that's what they are. That's what they do. And they've got that switch we were talking about before lunch, that I've got a job to do, I'm going to get it done. Some of the problems that can lead to is domestic violence at home. They're still in charge, and sometimes the spouse may not agree with that. The kids may not agree with that. And probably if law enforcement has a dirty little secret, that's it. Domestic violence. You won't hear a lot of talking about that. It is a cycle of abuse that you've encountered in other situations. And if they have to arrest another officer, that really is a problem. Does that happen? Yes, it does. Hopefully it doesn't happen very often. But control, when you start thinking like a cop, one of the first things that comes to mind is officer safety. You think of officer safety, got to be in control. That's just how they're geared. That's just how they're trained. That's what they become. Second area, trust versus lack of trust. They don't trust basically anybody. If you're not wearing blue or brown, they don't trust you. Chaplain, they need to be able to trust you. It's going to take you a while to earn that trust. This also is an officer safety question. They're just not very trusting people. Preachers tend to give more second chances than cops do. Cops, you get one shot at it. You blow that, you're pretty much done. You really have to work hard to overcome something if you blew that one opportunity. They are very loyal folks unless you break their trust. You know, they'll take a bullet for you, but man, if you've ever violated a trust, they'd probably step aside and let somebody shoot you. And they feel very, very foolish if somebody fools them. Most cops, their closest circle of friends is going to be the shift that they work on. And they develop a trust relationship there that exceeds anything we can really imagine. Authority, they have authority here. That's a symbol of their authority, that badge. They have a symbol of authority on their hip. This also is officer safety. They pretty much expect respect just because they're a cop. There's power and control, the uniform itself. But you can, again, get into problems at home, tend to be rigid, almost a military mindset, expecting compliance. The law is to be obeyed. This is the way it is. And that becomes an issue at home sometimes. So as you're trying to minister to cops with marital problems, tune your ears, because you may be looking at some of these things right here. They're trying to be a cop at home. There comes a time to be a cop. There comes a time to be dad or mom or husband or wife. They tend to be very conservative politically. They tend to have traditional beliefs and values. They may not have a biblical basis for them. Part of that schedule, part of it is they honestly have arrested too many church folks. And that's a stumbling block. They tend to have a very strong support of military, very pro-military. They tend to be very patriotic. And again, these are real general statements, you know. I've heard presentations on police personality where they say, you know, there's really not a mold. There's not a one kind. That's true. There's not. But these are some common traits that as you deal with officers, you'll see these. The versus thinking, judgmental. And I really want to stop with on this one for just a couple of minutes. It's pretty clear cut. Black versus white, right versus wrong, good versus bad, legal versus illegal, moral versus immoral, winner, loser, good guy, bad guy. I mean, it's pretty clear-cut dichotomy. I mean, it's And it shows up just about everywhere in law enforcement. But particularly, it's us versus them. It's us versus everybody else. Again, as a part of this, it's an officer safety thing because they have to size people up. But this is where I had a real aha. You know, if you ever go to a conference and you come away with an aha, you got something out of the conference. So you know what I'm talking about. Because of the us versus them thinking, where people, you know, this is right, this is wrong, this should be punished. Because of that mentality, the gospel is repulsive to them. Because at the heart of the gospel is grace. You don't get what you deserve. Does that make sense? Now take it the next step. But there's not a cop in any department anywhere that hasn't cut some slack for somebody. Gave them a verbal warning instead of a ticket. That's grace. Plain and simple. If they didn't give them what they deserved, it's grace. So while it becomes something that's repulsive to an officer, it's also something that can become a point of attack for us as ministers. Because you can always point out to them, you know, haven't you ever cut anybody a little slack? Oh, yeah. But I think God should... wait a minute. And I've had one encounter with an officer since it happened, but the shooting in Connecticut. A lot of people blaming God, aren't they? How come God didn't do something? You know, officers are thinking, how could God let that happen? What answer would you give them?
Of course, I'm Wesleyan theologically, so I go to the free will thing.
Yeah.
You know, and just say that, you know, God gives us free will, and we can use it productively or destructively. You know, and He's not going to.
As a general rule, God's not going to override our choice. This guy made some choices. You know, our lives are affected by other people's choices, good, bad, or otherwise. Our lives are affected by other people's choices, and that's certainly one thing to bring out: is that God, as a general rule, doesn't override our choices. We also know that believers don't have a guarantee that everything's going to be wonderful and easy. He does promise to be with us. So you got to kind of think a little bit about it, because you get in a ride-along situation shortly after something like this happens. I can almost guarantee you the questions are going to come up. Where was God? Well, God was there. Just like at 9/11, 9/11. So anyway, be aware of those spiritual things. You will have an opportunity to share your faith. Just don't kick the door in. Yeah. Wait for the opportunity. Cops are very competitive. When we've had nights when there hadn't been a lot going on, they're almost fighting over who takes the dog call. They want to have the best score at the shooting range. Their fantasy football team has to win. If they're involved in any kind of team sport, I mean, they are competitive to the utmost. How many citations did you get? How many drunks did you get in the last month? I mean, I had more than you did. I mean, there's just something about that. I can't tell you. And it's that win-lose kind of thing. And part of it's peer pressure. And part of it is just the ranks going after each other a little bit. All those things kind of factor in here. This is, you know, trying to give you a better handle on the police personality. The macho ego wouldn't want to be a female officer. They have to earn their spurs every day. I don't know how it is in this department, but I've seen our female officers, and some of them are no longer with us. We've had some that are very good cops and don't take any junk off anybody. And we've had others that were pretty good cops, but man, they just got every which direction. It's tough. And you can do a little separate study on dealing with female officers, because there's a whole different set of things to deal with female officers. And part of it is they're constantly earning their spurs with their male officers. We've had a couple of female officers that male officers have said specifically, I don't want her backing me. That's not a good relationship. That's not healthy for anybody. But it tends to be stereotypes. There's some ego problems. There's just a lot of factors there to be aware of, that macho ego. Idealism and cynicism, they start out, they're going to save the world and take all the bad guys to jail. And then as they're in it for a few years, all of them are bad guys. And you will hear phrases like dirtbags and shitheads, and everybody's lumped in. If you're not a cop, you're one of them. It's that us versus them mentality again. You need to be prepared for that, because that's going to fly in the face of what you believe as a minister. That Jesus died on a cross for everybody. And everybody has an opportunity to respond. Those kind of things. Not from a cop standpoint. May have cops ask, well, did that shooter in Connecticut go to heaven or hell? Well, let's see. As I understand things, the requirement for heaven is trusting Jesus. Don't know. They do have a helper mentality, wanting to rescue people, wanting to put bad guys in jail. Hardest calls for cops are kid calls. So you can imagine what the law enforcement people in Connecticut, from just the standpoint of dealing with that whole situation, what they're going through. When we have a call involving a kid, I tell the officers, go home, wake your kid up, hug him, rock him for a while, call your sergeant and see if you need to come back in. That's what I tell them. And sometimes their sergeants are good enough to say, go on home. But I'm telling them, go home and hug your kid. Stop by. Even if you don't stay, go see your kid. You need to go see your kid. Now, the next area deals with shame and guilt. They're two different things. When an officer moves from guilt to shame, they become a suicide risk. Guilt is I've done something wrong. I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad. Guilt, you deal with it with forgiveness. Shame, you deal with it with acceptance. When they feel shame, alcohol use increases. Cops are alcohol abusers. It's the way to escape. And if they start feeling ostracized and shame, you better watch them real close, because they're going to be in that suicide neighborhood. Times when they might feel shame, when they're being disciplined by the department, maybe they messed up. The bad guy gets away, commits another crime. Remember, after the bank robbery in Fremont, a trooper killed himself because he'd made a mistake. He'd stopped him. He got the wrong serial number on the gun, transposed a number. He saw it as his fault that they committed the bank robbery and the 5 homicides. He went out and shot himself. If they mess up, they're going to feel shame. When they're under some kind of investigation within the department, when there's some kind of criminal charges against them, when somehow they brought embarrassment to law enforcement, the threat of suicide increases. Now, earlier I mentioned the importance of their handgun. Why do you suppose the primary method of choice for a cop suicide is their handgun? Do what? Okay, yeah, that would be part of it. Yeah, that'd be part of it. What else?
It's just so readily available.
Readily available. That's true too. That's their partner. Their partner's got them out of a lot of tough fixes before. Their partner's going to get them out of this one. When an officer is involved in a shooting incident, where a suspect is shot, they immediately take his gun because it's evidence. They need to immediately give him another gun because that's part of his identity. And you will find in departments where there's an officer involved shooting, they will follow that. They will take his or her duty weapon, log it into evidence, and immediately issue a second handgun. That's why. But that's a pretty important partner. That's a big part of their identity. That's part of their authority. That's part of the control. All of that factors in here. But that's why they do it. Because that's part of their identity. So keep in mind that difference between shame and guilt. It's sometimes you've really got to probe because they'll cover it. Oh yeah, I'm doing fine. I've been around most of my officers long enough that I can get in their face and say, is that the truth or the polite conversational response? I'm okay, when can I ride with you? I do a lot of chaplaincy in the convenience of the cruiser. They're pretty protective of their family. Don't mess with their family, verbally or any other way. They do not operate on an emotional level. That's part of that control thing. Cops are often described as being unemotional. It's okay to tell your cops to cry. Don't stuff this. They're doers, they're not watchers. They want to fix things. Part of the frustration in law enforcement is when they can't fix something. Pastor, you don't have that problem, do you? I'm supposed to be able to fix this. Can't fix some things, like stupid, for example. I figure God took care of the sin of the whole world at one time. He's still working on what to do with stupid. That's my opinion. But anyway, you need to be aware of that. Cops in anger. That accumulation factor can surface in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's acted out on the shift. They just become a real boogerhead. Sometimes it's you stand back and watch their encounter with the public and you're going, oh gee, that's a complaint waiting to happen. Usually with our guys, about the 6th or 8th week of night shift is when the complaints start increasing because they're dealing with a different clientele. And they deal with the same clientele over and over and over again. And drunk and stupid is the most natural marriage in the universe. And it seems to find its way into lots of things. There's all kinds of things that are trauma, critical incidents. Again, the thing I would tell you to really watch out for is that accumulation factor. One event may not be particularly bad, But you add them all up, and I'll give you an example. We had a suicide. Man shot himself in his basement. His wife heard the shot and found him. I'm on call, so I respond. Sergeant is a 20-something year veteran. I don't know, 22 years, 24 years, I don't know, something. So I'm at the station the next day, and I said, "Hey, Sarge, how are you doing from the suicide yesterday?" And that's all I said. "Are you doing okay from the suicide yesterday?" He said, "Oh, this one wasn't too bad." And then he stopped. He said, "But the accumulation," as a big old tear rolled down his cheek, and he turned and walked away. And I rode with him later. Found out later I was the first chaplain in his whole career to ever ridden with him. The accumulation factor can really be a killer, can really be deadly for your officers. So tune yourself in, check on your officers, check on your dispatchers. You have a fatality accident, stick your head in dispatch just to see if the dispatchers are okay. Here's the thing about dispatchers. They're kind of locked away. They're sending their friends, generally officers and dispatchers are friends, not always, but generally. They're sending their friends into a dangerous, unknown situation, and they don't really see how it comes to completion. Stick your head in, and they will love you, because people don't do it. The brass doesn't do it. The road sergeants don't do it. Stick your head in just saying, "Hey, just wanted to check on you all, see if you were okay after the fatality the other day." They will love you. It is amazing the response you get by just saying, "Makes a difference to me how you're doing." And maybe instead of a ride-along, go sit in dispatch sometime for a couple hours and see what dispatchers have to deal with. The multitasking, the police officer on one frequency and the deputy on another frequency, and some yo-yo on the telephone and looking something up in the computer. And they're pretty remarkable people. And they have a very, very difficult job. Alcohol abuse, you're not going to stop cops drinking, but you need to decide how you're going to deal with it, particularly if they allow you to come to shift parties or something. Now, they know I drink Pepsi, so it's not even a question anymore. They don't even offer me a beer or anything else. Jim and Jack. But you do need to decide how you're going to deal with alcohol, because it ain't going to go away. That's going to be a continuing part. And remember that alcohol is a depressant. And if somebody's depressed, the last thing they need is alcohol. And, you know, there's lots of ways you can argue alcohol, but it boils down to, I'm not seeing anything good come from it. You know? About the second or third time that you make a death notification on a teenager who was drunk, you won't have much use for alcohol either. Because almost without exception, when you make a death notification where it's involved, if it's a teenager, as soon as they get some of the basics about the accident, they will say, had they been drinking? And sometimes the kid got the liquor out of Dad's liquor cabinet. So anyway, there's just some general things about police personality characteristics. Thoughts, observations, questions? Anything come to mind there?
It sounds like it's the kind of job where it'd be very easy to become sarcastic and jaded.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You slide right into cynicism. Beyond the sarcastic and jaded, you slide right into cynicism that everybody's bad. I'm kind of concerned about you, you know, and they start looking at their shift, you know, but it can be there are other guys, other officers that have a pretty good support system, and some of those are faith-based. Let's throw that in there. The faith-based officers do better. There's just not that many of them. But it's a mission field. But you're exactly right. And usually it's about, the first 3, maybe 5 years, they're in that idealistic state. And then they start to slide. And the longer they're in, the more they get that way. Why do they keep doing it? I don't know. They must like part of it. But when you have to deal with, honestly, some of the stupid stuff over and over again, people that are doing the same thing and get arrested time after time for the same thing, the other side of it is, the other aspect of that particular mentality is officers will bust their tails on a case and the person gets off, or there's some kind of loophole, or the defense attorney questions something that nobody in their right mind would question, or a plea agreement, or I've seen officers come back from court just mad. I stay out of their way. I mean, they're just raging bulls almost because somebody got off. And they had done it, when you do everything right in the investigation, you document everything, you got your evidence, you did everything you're supposed to do, and they get off. You turn around and you go, why am I doing this? Valid question, and that's why a lot of people get out of law enforcement. They get tired of bucking it. Why am I killing myself trying to do this? And they just get off. That's why I couldn't be a cop. That'd drive me nuts. So unless they've got a pretty good support system, that's where they're going to be. And even with a support system, they're going to be in the neighborhood after a while. Or they'll get fed up with the department. Well, we don't have the equipment we need. We don't get training. And so they start taking it out on the department. When anger's involved, you really need to figure out what they're angry about. Where is the anger actually being directed? We get angry because something we value is threatened. We grieve because we lose something or someone we value. You got to figure out what they're grieving. Yeah. Yeah. Have I told you my opinion about people in jail? I used to think there was a lot of angry people in jail. I don't believe that anymore. They're in jail because of some grief they haven't dealt with. There is an unresolved grief. They have not dealt with a loss. When you stuff grief, it will result in inappropriate behavior or physical problems. If it's inappropriate behavior, they're going to get arrested. Now, this is one of those little things that I guess God's gifted me with. When I make a jail visit, I can tell you in 5 minutes what they lost. It will surface that quickly. Grandma died. My wife left me. My kids won't have anything to do with me. My girlfriend left town. Some kind of loss. Now, you want to sharpen your ministry skills, Pastor? Tune your ear to hear what people have lost. And you will find a way to minister to them. It may be a divorce. It may be a move. I mean, there's a long list. Tune your ear to hear the loss, and you'll find a way to minister to them. I can pretty much guarantee you that. But that's my opinion about folks in jail. They're there because of unresolved grief. Quite a jump from anger. I was at a presentation one time about anger. And I'm being quiet and reserved as I am. I raised my hand. Don't look at me like that. I raised my hand and I asked the presenter, can you tell me the difference between anger at some situation or some person and grief anger? And he stepped away from the podium, stepped back up and said, no. Now, translate that. I mean, think that through. Are they angry at this situation, or did they lose something causing them to be angry then? It kind of makes sense. It kind of tracks. With cops, you may have trouble finding out what they lost. You're really going to have to tune your ear because they will deflect it. They will put up their shield, their defense shield, and they will deflect it. Part of their defense mechanism is alcohol. And you can run into all kinds of problems here. Denial. Oh, no, I don't have an alcohol problem. You can find others covering for them. Well, yeah, he went home sick. Well, yeah, he was sick. He had a hangover. Different kinds of behaviors, and you see a list of them. There's all kinds of things that can result from alcohol. It's real tough to get folks to recognize a solution there. But as a chaplain, you need to be aware of the fact that alcohol is part of the cop culture. Now, think about it for a moment. Why do, besides curiosity and rebellion and some of those kind of things, why do you think teenagers drink? What do they hear from adults? You can't have a party without alcohol. Want to have a good time? We need to go pick up some beer. Everything in the adult culture says if you don't have alcohol, you're not going to have any fun. You're not going to have a good time. One of the major sources for youth having a drinking problem is adults. And some of the adults buy it for them. Gee, thanks a lot. So there's a lot of things involved there. Some things, this is on page 8 of your police personality handout. Work performance, all kinds of things start happening at work. And eventually a cop is going to get himself or herself in trouble at work. And then they will be confronted with the alcohol. They'll have to do something. They'll either find a new job or get some treatment or get some help or something. And you see some characteristics there: dependency, defensive, tunnel vision, self-centered, perfectionism. They're just frozen in their feelings. Their ethics deteriorate. They're not oriented, stressful, forgetfulness, negativism, fear, projection. This is not something that just goes away either. And I'm sure in the pastoral role you've dealt with alcohol problems. Just realize that with the police mentality and some of those characteristics that we looked at, it really compounds the alcohol problem. Cops and suicide. If for whatever reason you think a cop is thinking about sucking on his own gun, and that's the phrase you will hear, they will talk about sucking on their own gun. You hear a cop say that, you better talk to somebody, because that cop is thinking about suicide. Even if they're, quote, joking around, I'm just going to go suck on the end of my gun. One of the common responses in a suicide is anger. Not anger at God, anger at the person that committed suicide. Let me tell you something. If you want to see anger, you be around some cops where one of their colleagues has committed suicide. They are mad. They are really mad. Particularly if the individual did it in their jurisdiction where somebody from that department has to work it. And here's one of those things where the visual images that lock into our brain can really be devastating. You know, this is a friend, this is a colleague, and his brains are over here, and his face is over there, and there's blood all over the ceiling. And this is where you as a chaplain need to tune into the needs of your officers. You may need to do a little extra riding along. And just see how people, give them a chance to vent. Turn your hearing aids off so you don't hear the language that they're going to use. But there's still that general need of people to know that somebody gives a rip that they're there. I know a couple of officers that will not attend the funeral of an officer that commits suicide. They will not do it. He has dishonored everybody in law enforcement. I'm not going to honor him by going to his funeral. And they are locked into that. And even if they had known the person that commits it, they're not going to go. They won't do it. I can't explain that very well, other than it's a real intense form of anger, grief. Sometimes when a cop's likely to consider suicide, he or she's depressed, marital problems, post-traumatic stress, the accumulation factor, I've mentioned it. They stop talking, they start drinking more, they start making references. They're under discipline or investigation by the department. They get reckless. I don't care if it gets shot, you know. Maybe they don't wait for backup on something. There's a lot of times officers are directed, you don't go in until backup's there, period. All kinds of things factor into it. They want to stop the pain. Now, down at the bottom, I've got the question, how many departments have a policy for line of duty death? How many departments have a policy for non-duty related death, like suicide? You would probably be appalled to know. And I can't tell you about Hastings PD. I don't know what they've got in place. But several years ago, I taught a class at the Law Enforcement Training Center on line of duty death and policies. There were 26 sheriffs in that class. 24 of them did not have a line of duty death policy. Not going to happen to us. And then if something happens, they're scrambling trying to figure out, what do I do? Everybody thinks it doesn't happen to them. Carney didn't think a teenage girl would be kidnapped from the mall parking lot a few years ago. Remember Ann Sluty? Maybe you've seen the report with one of the networks. But she was. They freed her in Montana. She'd been raped repeatedly. They negotiated her release from my office. My role as chaplain in that situation was coordinating food and pop and water and stuff like that, having stuff available. Because they were working 24 hours a day. And my job was in-flight refueling. Having stuff available, they come by and grab something and go back to the phones, or, you know. When the FBI shows up, you don't make a lot of suggestions, just so you'll know. And they sort of take over. But that was my function as chaplain. I wasn't with the officers that were in Montana that were, you know, trying to get her home or anything like that. I wasn't spending a lot of time talking with officers. My job was in-flight refueling, making sure we had food. We were feeding 3 meals a day and spreading it out so that they could pretty much eat around the clock, making pop, and water, and tea, and that kind of stuff. All that, having that available, that was my job. That's all I did. But evidently it was enough. I can't even tell it without tearing up. One of the FBI guys came up and shook my hand and said, "You kept us going." Sorry. You know the story of the starfish? The little boy throwing them back? And the guy says, "You can't make a difference to all of them." He says, "Well, I made a difference to that one." You got to remember, there's a chaplain. You're not going to touch every officer, but you may make a difference to some of them. You need to remember that as a pastor too, just so you'll know. Okay, any observations about police personality? You have a couple of handouts, 3 handouts, I think, about stress and stress management, and you're probably sick and tired of hearing about stress management, because I'm sure you get those in religious circles. Do we need to stop?